Come on then, here we go. The teams have had a couple of weeks to delve into their upgrades, but it's time for Formula One to head west once again as we head to Canada for round 8 of the 2023 season. As usual, I'm going to be giving you my early predictions on how the likes of Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull may fare this weekend, so stick around for that. But let's first discuss everything that you need to know about the Canadian Grand Prix. This weekend's race sees the drivers complete 70 laps of the 4.361 kilometre circuit Gilles Villeneuve in Montreal. The circuit, of course, getting its name from Canada's second most iconic driver after Nicolas Latifi, Gilles Villeneuve. The first Canadian Grand Prix held at this circuit was in 1978, where hometown hero Gilles Villeneuve himself won for Ferrari. I'm going to stop saying Gilles Villeneuve now. Gilles went on to spend 6 years in Formula One, competing in the red of the Scuderia Ferrari, picking up 6 victories in that time, although he would go on to tragically lose his life in the 1982 Belgian Grand Prix. His legacy would live on though, as his son Jacques Villeneuve went on to be a Formula One world champion in 1997, the one and only Canadian to achieve this feat, until of course Lance Stroll does it in a couple of years' time. Back to this weekend, however, and after the Spanish Grand Prix saw the removal of its final chicane to allow for better racing, there was no way that Canada was going to do the same. The track has seen no major updates since the 2022 Grand Prix, as it's already known for its spectacular racing. The mixture of long straights, including 3 DRS zones, and tricky braking zones as well, make it perfect for those late braking moves up the inside, especially down in towards the turn 10 hairpin, as well as the numerous chicanes. Although the track isn't a street circuit like we've seen in Baku or Monaco, the walls are still incredibly tight around the circuit Gilles Villeneuve, with turn 4 often catching drivers out as they fight their way through the first sector, as well as the wall at turn 14, more commonly known as the Wall of Champions. Even the greatest drivers in the sport have been just one corner away from completing their lap, only to collide with that infamous wall, putting themselves out of whatever session they are in. Like in 1999, we saw Canadian Jacques Villeneuve joined by fellow world champions Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill in the garage, as all three collided with the barrier. Although the track is deceptively tricky, it's not too heavy on tyre wear, and Pirelli will be offering the softest tyre range possible, with the C3, C4 and C5 compounds being available to the teams this weekend. I think it's probably going to be a 2-stop strategy that we'll see most commonly this weekend, similar to what we saw in Spain, with the soft tyre being effectively a qualifying tyre, and then the mediums and hard compound tyres used during the race. However, the tyres available might not even matter at the Canadian Grand Prix, as it's known for its unpredictable weather patterns, and it feels like it always rains in at least one session in Canada. Just ask Jenson Button, who managed to win a soaking wet Canadian Grand Prix back in 2011 after 4 hours of racing and 6 pit stops, which to this day is still the longest Grand Prix thanks to countless stops and safety cars, as well as the most pit stops leading to a victory in Formula One history too. So if that happens this weekend, it's basically completely unpredictable. However, I will of course be putting my wheel knowledge on the line and predicting this weekend, starting with the best drive. If you're a Ferrari fan, I'm seeing the Canadian Grand Prix as a ray of hope within an incredibly tough season, and I'm backing Charles Leclerc to put in a solid performance this weekend. As we touched upon before, Canada is a power track. This means straights and tight bends that are very similar to the likes of Saudi Arabia and Baku. Now, Charles has had a season to forget so far in 2023, every weekend seeming like it's going incredibly wrong, but I would argue his 2 best sessions have been Saudi Arabia qualifying, where he put the car on the front row, only to drop back because of engine penalties, and the Azerbaijan weekend, which saw the Monash driver pick up his only podium of the season so far. There is of course 2 things that could go against him. Firstly, since those 2 performances, there have been dramatic changes to that Ferrari car through upgrades, but hopefully they still have that raw pace, especially in qualifying, that they've had over the last couple of seasons, because that's really where Charles Leclerc can shine. And secondly, it's Ferrari. Even though they are historically the most successful team in Canada, they always have a mistake in them. If the weather is mixed and the strategy choices become complex, I just don't trust Ferrari to get it right. Which is why when it comes to the best team, I'm tempted to just build on what I said with Charles Leclerc and go for Ferrari, but that isn't overly exciting. It's also not a track that really lends itself much to the Red Bull, Aston Martin or Mercedes cars, as we've seen some ups and downs from all 3 of them when we look back at Saudi Arabia and Baku. So I'm going to go for a team that I think everyone should be watching incredibly closely at the minute. It's Alpine. There truly is something happening here, in my opinion. Like, since they were completely blasted by Laurent front Rossi for not making enough progress compared to Aston, they really have started putting in some performances. I know it's easy to look at Ocon's podium and rave about Alpine just because of that one performance, but then again in Spain it was very, very strong as Ocon finished best of the rest, and had Gasly not picked up those penalties and started in 4th place, maybe he would have finished somewhere in the mix of those top 4 teams like we saw him nearly do in Australia. I just think the constructor standings doesn't really do justice to the pace of that car. They've battled amongst the top 4 teams fairly regularly, and they are far clear from the rest of the midfield too, in my opinion. On top of that, if we look back at the 2022 Canadian Grand Prix, there was an Alpine on the front row in Fernando Alonso, and Esteban Ocon finished in 6th place. I know that Baku was by far and away their worst weekend this year, and I've said there are a lot of parallels between that track and Canada, but I think that was just a one-off weekend, and this weekend could be spectacular for Les Bleus. Although when it comes to struggles, after being so positive about Zhou Guanyu last time out in Spain, I think the Alfa Romeo car will let him and Bottas down this weekend in Canada. I think the Alfa will struggle in Canada because, again, if we look at like Saudi Arabia and Azerbaijan as our case study, in both of those races, the Alfa boys qualified fairly well, but fell backwards come Sunday, with Canada being a very high-speed track, but also having a lot more overtaking opportunities than both of those tracks before. It could be even worse this weekend. Now, I am aware that I've just used 2022 to back Alpine, and in Canada last year, we saw Bottas finish in 7th and Zhou Guanyu finish just behind in 8th, but the Ferrari power unit seemed to have a lot higher straight-line speed advantage last year compared to this year. Like, if we look at the speed traps again in Saudi Arabia and Baku this year, the Alfa has been very middle of the pack. To give them a little benefit of the doubt, Bottas was carrying minimal damage during both of those previous power tracks this year, but it does seem like Bottas has floor damage at almost every single Grand Prix nowadays, whilst Zhou has been getting slowly better over the course of this year and has a real opportunity to kick on after Spain this weekend too, so that extra confidence may keep him in contention, even if the car isn't amazing. Moving on to my podium predictions, and I'm of course starting with Fernando Alonso. He missed out on a podium at his home Grand Prix last time out in Spain, but made it very clear that that won't be happening again. And although the Aston Martin car hasn't found its best form on the more power-heavy tracks this year, if you look at Fernando in 2022, he started 2nd on the grid in an Alpine. Alright, he was let down by the French car's reliability, as he was throughout the entire season, but the Aston Martin seems absolutely bulletproof this year, so I can see him getting the best out of the car, qualifying high on the grid, and picking up another podium. I've already spoken about Charles Leclerc earlier as my driver of the day, so I couldn't not put him on the podium, really, could I? I can see it being a classic qualifying masterclass from Charles Leclerc, maybe even a pole position like we saw in Baku, but even if he starts on pole, I can't see a Ferrari win because Max Verstappen still exists. The Spanish Grand Prix showed just why the championship seems to be basically wrapped up 7 races into the season. Last year, we at least had the discussion of Ferrari until around the summer break. This year, Red Bull is just completely in a class of its own, and Max seems to be ripping through the field without really breaking a sweat. Like Saudi, he started 15th and only fell to his teammate, and in Baku again, it was only Perez who beat him thanks to a little luck with the safety car. Like, I genuinely think if he qualifies in the top 13, 14 cars, he'll probably win this race. Thinking about a crazy prediction makes me go 2 different ways. First of all, and maybe more obvious, is that we'll see the full wet tyre in Canada, like at some point, which always mixes up the grid, but will mix up the grid even more due to the Canadian track being very slippery and the lack of knowledge the teams have on the brand new wet tyre compound that was introduced in Spain. But secondly, I'm feeling the wall of champions claiming another champion. Obviously, it then comes to who. Verstappen, Hamilton, Alonso, any of those would be massive, but hear me out. Nick de Vries, does he count as a champion, even if it is a Formula 1 adjacent series? He won Formula E, therefore a champion, and therefore will be claimed by the wall. As always, I would absolutely love to know all of your predictions for the Canadian Grand Prix weekend in the comments down below. And whilst you're down there, in the description, I've linked the video that I think you'll be interested in on why Formula 1 teams seem to upgrade specifically in Spain. So click that link or follow the link on the end card, and I'll see you over there.